I never imagined I could be replaced so quietly. It happened slowly, like watching a shadow grow across a room. At first, I thought I was just tired, or maybe I was overthinking things, but looking back now, the signs were always there. They were simply too small for anyone else to notice. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to say a word. The story begins in my own home, a warm place with soft yellow lights and old family pictures on the walls. For years, this house felt safe. My daughter Amina and I shared everything. She would tell me about her day, and I would listen with a smile. We cooked together in the kitchen, laughing over burnt chapati or spilled flour. The house echoed with small joys. When she married, I was happy for her. Her husband, Karim, seemed respectful and calm. I welcomed him like a son. Weddings are like rainstorms, beautiful, loud, sometimes confusing, but when they pass, you hope the air feels fresh again. At first, it did. After they moved in with me, our home stayed warm. We shared late tea in the evenings. Sometimes, I watched them whisper and giggle like children. It gave me comfort. Then, one afternoon, Karim's cousin arrived. Her name was Sana. She said she was visiting for a week. A week turned into 2, then a month. I didn't question it. Family is family, I thought. But slowly, the change began. One morning, I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. I found Sana already there, wearing my apron, using my spices, arranging things in different places. She smiled and said, "I'll take care of this, auntie. You should rest." At first it sounded polite, but it felt like a door slowly closing. Over days, she replaced my routines quietly, gently, almost kindly. She began cooking meals. She began answering questions meant for me. When guests visited, she served the tea. She sat in my chair at the dining table without thinking. I sat on the edge now. Looking in. At night, I lay awake longer than usual. I would whisper to myself, maybe she is just helping. But my heart whispered back, you are being moved aside. I noticed small conversations happening when I entered a room. They would stop talking and exchange glances. When I asked what they were discussing, they said, "Oh, nothing important." I laughed to hide the pain. The worst part wasn't the replacement. It was the silence of others. Everyone saw it. No one spoke. I told myself not to cry. Tears can blur the truth, and I needed to see clearly. One evening, as I folded laundry alone, I finally admitted it. My place at the table had shifted, and no one reached out to hold it for me, but I still hoped it was temporary. I still hoped my daughter would notice. I still hoped someone would say, "We miss you." Hope can be heavy, and I was growing tired of carrying it. The days that followed felt heavier than before. Every morning, I would wake up early, the way I always had, ready to prepare breakfast and warm the house with familiar routines. But each time I stepped into the kitchen, Sana was already there, humming softly as she stirred a pot or arranged plates on the table. She smiled when she saw me and said, "Auntie, please, you should rest. You've done this for years." Her words sounded kind, but they settled in my chest like stones. What was meant to be gentle started to feel like a reminder. Your time here is ending. My daughter Amina noticed nothing, or perhaps she did, but didn't want to deal with it. She would greet Sana warmly and thank her for the meals. When I served tea, Amina would say, "Oh mom, you don't have to. Sana already made some." I would quietly return the tray, pretending not to feel the sting. After all, I told myself, this house runs smoother when everyone helps. But once, I tried to cook a simple dish, something only I knew how to make. As I reached for the spices, I noticed the containers had been moved. Things were not where I left them. I opened 3 different cabinets before finding my ingredients. As I cooked, I heard soft whispers behind me. When I turned, both Amina and Sana looked away. "What were you talking about?" I asked gently. "Oh, nothing," Amina replied, avoiding eye contact. That was the moment I felt a small crack inside me. In the evenings, I would try to join them in conversation, but somehow, Sana always had a story to tell, a joke to share, a memory that drew everyone's attention. My voice felt small in the room. Sometimes, I would start a sentence, then stop halfway, realizing no one was listening. One afternoon, I found Sana sitting with my daughter, laughing over old photos of Amina as a child. They didn't notice me standing there. I watched as Sana pointed at one picture and said, "Oh, look at you, so small and cute." My throat tightened. Those memories were mine. I had lived those days, stayed awake during fevers, held her hand during storms, prayed quietly for her future. And now, someone else held that space. I quietly stepped away before they could see the tears forming. That night, Lying in my room, I placed my hand on my chest. It felt cold, empty. I whispered to the ceiling, "Is this how it happens?" Not with shouting, but with silence. The next morning, at breakfast, I noticed my chair at the table had been pushed to the corner. Sana sat in the seat I had always used. No one said a word. I stood there for a moment, then gently pulled up a chair from far away. I smiled, but my smile trembled like fragile glass. Sometimes, replacement doesn't look like betrayal. Sometimes, it looks like forgetting, and everyone pretended not to notice. Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt this moment in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more emotional real-life stories. Your support means everything. The quiet changes became more visible with time. At first, they were small, almost invisible, like dust gathering in corners, but slowly, they piled up until I could no longer pretend they weren't there. One evening, I walked into the living room, expecting the usual warmth of family chatter. Instead, I found Sana sitting in my seat again, surrounded by Amina and Kareem. They were planning a small dinner party, something simple to celebrate the weekend. I listened for a moment before joining them. "I can help with cooking," I said softly. Sana's smile was polite. "It's fine, Auntie. We already made a menu." Amina nodded as if this was normal. My hands dropped quietly to my sides. I waited for someone to ask my opinion, to include me, to say they needed my help, but the conversation continued without pause. I walked away quietly, feeling like an old picture on a wall, still there. But no one really sees it. Later that night, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I followed the sound. The three of them were gathered around a recipe book, laughing at some joke I didn't understand. Plates and bowls were everywhere. It looked like fun. I lifted a tray to wash. Sana gently placed her hand on mine. "No, Auntie, we've got it." Her tone was soft, but firm, a closed door disguised as courtesy. That weekend, the guests arrived. It was a warm evening, and soft yellow lights glowed across our living room. I sat quietly in a corner, smiling whenever someone looked my way. Sana moved around the room with confidence, pouring tea, offering snacks, talking about the house as if she had lived there all her life. One woman asked, "Oh Sana, your home is beautiful." I waited for someone to correct her, to say, "This is Auntie's home." But no one did. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. It wasn't anger, just a long, quiet ache. I realized then that I wasn't losing my place suddenly. I was fading out of it. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I walked through the silent house. I touched the framed photos on the wall, my fingertips sliding across memories. My eyes fell on a picture of Amina as a child, hugging me tightly. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Do you remember, my daughter? Or has someone else remembered for you?" When I returned to the living room, I saw the dining table. My chair was pushed aside again, closer to the wall. It felt like a message spoken without words. I lay in bed for hours, listening to the quiet. That silence spoke louder than anything. It said, "You are no longer needed here." And as the sun climbed over the horizon, I understood something painful. You don't always lose your place through conflict. Sometimes you lose it through acceptance, from everyone except yourself. The morning after that dinner, I moved slower than usual. The house felt different, not in how it looked, but in how it listened. It no longer echoed back my footsteps. The sounds of laughter now came from rooms I wasn't invited into. I began spending more time in my own room, pretending to rest. It was easier that way, easier than waiting for someone to ask, "Why are you so quiet?" Sometimes, I heard their laughter through the door. Amina's voice, Kareem's deep chuckle, Sana's high, easy tone. I would smile to myself, pretending it didn't sting. But there's something about being forgotten while you're still present. It cuts differently. One afternoon, I walked out to make tea. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, Sana looked surprised, almost uncomfortable. "Oh, Auntie," she said, "you don't have to do that. I already made some for everyone." I looked at the tray in her hands, cups arranged perfectly, steam rising softly, and I said, "It's okay, dear. I was just coming to boil water." But she didn't hear the ache behind those words. She simply smiled and walked away. When Amina joined her in the living room, she said cheerfully, "Sana makes the best tea now, doesn't she?" I smiled. "Yes, she does." That was the day I realized silence can protect you from breaking apart in front of people who no longer see you. At night, I sat near the window, watching the lights outside flicker. I thought of all the years I had filled this house with laughter, with warmth, with effort no one could measure, and now, I was just a quiet presence in the background. I remembered when Amina was little, how she would cling to me every night, refusing to sleep unless I hummed her favorite lullaby. I used to think motherhood meant forever. But forever, I learned, can change shape. One evening, I found a small moment of courage. I asked Amina, "Do you think I've done something wrong? Have I made you or Kareem uncomfortable?" She looked surprised. "No, Mom, of course not. Why would you say that?" I smiled weakly. "It just feels different these days." She hugged me quickly but didn't say anything else. And sometimes, it's the missing words that hurt the most. That night, I made a promise to myself not to complain, not to cry, not to make her feel guilty. Instead, I would stay quiet and let the house find its new rhythm. But deep inside, I knew silence wasn't peace. It was survival. And every day, I faded a little more into it. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true, emotional stories that remind us what family and love really mean. Weeks passed, and I watched things change in small, almost invisible ways. My routines, once part of the home's heartbeat, were now interruptions. When I tried to sweep the hallway, Sana would take the broom gently from my hands and say, "Rest, Auntie. You've worked enough." Worked enough. Those words echoed in my head long after she left. One afternoon, I walked past the living room and heard them talking in soft voices. I did not mean to listen, but their quiet tone pulled me closer. "We should rearrange the house," Sana whispered. "I agree," Kareem replied. "It will feel more organized." Amina sighed softly. "Just don't hurt her feelings." That single sentence froze me in place. I understood then they were planning around me, not with me. Later that evening, while I was watering the plants outside, I noticed that some of my favorite picture frames were gone from the living room shelf. When I asked about them, Amina shrugged. "Oh, we are making space. They are in the storage room now." The storage room, my memories were now stored away, too. I nodded quietly, though something inside me cracked softly. A few days later, guests came again. They were relatives from Kareem's side. When they arrived, Sana greeted them warmly, guiding them around the house as though she had grown roots in its walls. She showed them the kitchen, the garden, the living room, all with confidence. I stood back, hands folded, smiling politely. One of the guests looked at me and asked softly, "You must be the helper." For a moment, everything went silent in my mind. A helper. I looked at Amina, waiting for her to correct the misunderstanding. She hesitated, then said softly, "No, that's my mom." Her voice lacked the pride I remembered from her childhood. It sounded like an apology. The guests laughed awkwardly and moved on. I excused myself and went to the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, feeling my heartbeat slow and heavy. I thought about how quietly identity fades, not in sudden storms, but in soft, daily rains. When the guests left, Sana placed leftovers in containers and said, "Auntie, you can have these." It felt like charity, though she meant it kindly. That night, while everyone slept, I sat at the dining table. I looked at the chairs. Mine was still pushed aside. I pulled it back to its old spot, just to feel normal for a moment. I sat there quietly, hands resting on the wooden surface. I whispered into the darkness. When did I stop belonging? Tears formed, but I wiped them away. I did not want the house to taste salt in the morning. As the clock ticked softly, I realized something important. Sometimes people do not push you out loudly. They simply step further in, leaving no space for you. And the saddest part, everyone pretends not to notice. Life continued in silence, and I learned to move quietly through the house, almost like a guest. I woke up early every morning, but instead of heading to the kitchen, I sat by the window and watched the sun paint soft colors across the sky. It was peaceful, but that peace felt borrowed, not earned. One afternoon, while I sat folding my clothes, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found my sister-in-law, Farah, standing there with a warm smile. She visited rarely, so her presence felt like a surprise gift. "Auntie, you look tired," she said softly as she hugged me. I smiled, though I felt the truth in her words. We sat in the living room, talking about old days. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, seen, heard, valued. But then, something happened. As we talked, Sana walked into the room. She smiled politely, but her eyes tightened. "Would you like tea?" she asked Farah sweetly. Farah smiled. "Only if you don't mind, Sana." Sana nodded and left. When she returned, she placed the tea gently on the table, in front of Farah, but she didn't offer me a cup. Farah noticed immediately, her brows pulled together. No tea for her, Sana blinked. Oh, I thought she wasn't having any. Farah looked directly at me. I forced a small smile, whispering, it's fine. But at WASN single quotes T. When Sana left, Farah leaned closer and whispered, since when does she decide what you do in your own home? The words stirred something inside me, something I had buried. Later, Farah asked about the missing picture frames. I told her they were in storage. She sighed. They're putting your memories away. Her voice broke slightly, and for the first time, I saw my pain reflected in someone else's eyes. Before she left, Farah gently took my hand. You deserve respect in your own home. Those words lingered long after the door closed. That evening, Amina approached me. Mom, why did you tell Farah those things? She looked upset. I hesitated. I didn't say anything bad, dear. She simply noticed. Amina sighed. Well, I don't want drama here, okay? I nodded quietly. Drama. That's what my pain had become, an inconvenience. As night fell, I walked through the house slowly. The lights were dim, the air still. I touched the edges of the dining table, the chairs, the walls, all the places my hands had shaped with love. In the hallway, I could hear muted laughter from Sana's room. I smiled weakly. Life had shifted, and somehow, I had become the quiet shadow behind it. Before going to bed, I whispered into the dark, maybe I should learn to be small, so no one feels discomfort. And with that thought, I closed my door gently, not wanting it to make a sound. Thank you for listening to this emotional part of my story. If you felt this deeply, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support encourages more true, heartfelt stories to be shared. Days blended into weeks, and I became quieter with each sunrise. I watched life move around me, like a river flowing past a rock that no longer shaped its path. Every night, I sat by the window, whispering old prayers, asking for guidance. I never asked for much, only a place of belonging. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Sana rearranging the shelves again. My spices were placed out of reach. My pots were in new cabinets. I stood still, watching her. Auntie, she said kindly, I'm just organizing. It's better this way. Better for whom? I wondered. When I reached for the jar of lentils, she stopped me gently. Let me handle this. You might strain yourself. At your age, you should rest. Those words struck deeper than intended. At my age, as if I were too old to belong. Later, while everyone prepared for another family gathering, I tried to help set the table. Sana quickly took the plates from my hands. I already have a plan. You can sit, Amina added. Mom, trust us. Just relax. Relax. That word had become a polite way to say, you are in the way. I sat in the corner, folding my hands calmly, watching. The rooms I once filled with flavor and warmth now echoed with someone else's voice, someone younger, louder, more present. During the gathering, a distant cousin arrived. She hugged Amina tightly, congratulating her on her beautiful home. Then she turned to Sana, smiling. You must be the lady of the house. Everything looks perfect. My breath caught. I stared at Amina, waiting, hoping she would correct her. But she hesitated, smiled softly, and said nothing. The cousin then turned toward me, offering a small, confused nod, as if trying to remember who I was. I forced a smile, but my heart trembled. I felt invisible. Later, while everyone sat in the living room, laughing and sharing stories, I excused myself quietly. No one noticed. I walked down the hallway, stopping at a mirror hanging on the wall. I stared at my reflection, the tired eyes, the quiet lips, the defeated posture. When did you become a guest in your own home? I whispered. A soft tear slid down my cheek. I didn't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I returned to the kitchen. I made myself a small cup of tea, the only thing still familiar. As I lifted it to my lips, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Kareem. He paused, then said gently, Auntie, maybe you should take a trip, visit relatives. It could be good for you. I felt the room spin slowly. A trip, or an exit. I see, I whispered, my voice barely sound. That night, alone in my room, I cried silently. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears that slid into the pillow. Unseen. Because sometimes, being replaced doesn't feel like losing a battle, it feels like quietly disappearing. The days after that night were quiet, almost painfully so. The house continued to hum with life, but it no longer felt like mine. I moved through the rooms like a shadow, still present, but unnoticed. And yet, in the silence, I began to see something I had missed before, my own strength. I realized that my place in their home had shifted, but that didn't mean I had no value. It only meant that I had been holding on to a space that others had decided to fill. And for the first time, I understood that my worth wasn't tied to approval or attention. One morning, I packed a small bag, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of quiet clarity. I whispered to myself, it's time to step back, to breathe, to remember who I am. Before leaving, I walked through the house slowly. I touched the edges of the table I had polished for years. I looked at the photos hanging on the walls, my daughter as a child, my family laughing, moments of warmth and love that no one could take from me. I smiled softly, remembering that those memories were mine, always mine. Amina approached me at the door. Mom, you're leaving, she asked, her voice hesitant. I held her hands gently. I'm not leaving forever. I just need to find a little peace. Maybe when I return, things will feel lighter. She nodded, but her eyes held a question I could not answer. Will you come back? I hugged her, whispering softly, always. As I walked out, I felt a strange sense of calm. The air outside felt different, free. I could breathe without holding in disappointment. I could look at my life without feeling small. I realized that being replaced quietly had been painful, but it had also taught me something invaluable. My heart is not defined by the space I occupy in someone else's life. For days, I stayed with relatives, reflecting quietly, reading old letters, and sitting under the sun. I realized that love and belonging are not always loud or visible. Sometimes, they live quietly in memories, in resilience, and in the choices we make to honor ourselves. When I finally returned home, the house hadn't changed. Sana was still here, still moving through rooms with her bright energy. But I no longer felt invisible. I walked in slowly, letting my presence settle naturally. I no longer needed anyone to make room for me. I made my own space, a quiet one, but it was mine. Life is full of moments like this. Moments when people forget us, or when roles shift. But it's in those moments we find our strength, our peace, and a deeper understanding of who we truly are. And I learned this simple truth. No one can replace the love and memories you carry in your heart. They are yours forever. Thank you for following my story until the end. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more real-life emotional stories. Your support helps these voices be heard.